It's hard to believe that most of the year is already behind us. The leaves are turning and it's Thanksgiving season again. And today I'm going to talk about why I think Thanksgiving might be the most important holiday of the whole year. Quite a few years ago now, my brother and I started this friendly debate about who came up with Thanksgiving first. Was it the Canadians or the Americans? Now, as an immigrant to this country, I had no choice. I had to take the position that the Americans invented the holiday, so it belongs to them. As a Canadian, my brother took the other side of the question. And see, you've got to understand that in my tribe, arguing is an art form. It doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong. What matters is that you win the argument. And I'll admit, debating is a pastime that's kind of served me well because it taught me to examine other people's points of view very carefully so that I at least understand them, even if I don't agree. And I guess I owe some of the perspectives I've adopted on this show to a lifetime of debate. Anyway, back to the rather meaningless debate about who invented Thanksgiving. The story we tell in America is rooted in the first harvest the Pilgrims enjoyed in November of 1621, when the Wampanoag Indians famously joined the Pilgrims for a celebratory feast. And we don't know for sure that they were eating turkey that day. We do know they were eating birds, as recorded by the famous Pilgrim Edward Winslow, who actually made a note of what they did that day. He writes, "Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, so we might after a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruits of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as with a little help beside served the company almost a week." Now, as you probably know, food wasn't exactly abundant for those early colonists, and they suffered a lot of hardship when they first arrived. In fact, if the Wampanoags had not taught them how to survive in the New World, they probably wouldn't have made it. So the story of Thanksgiving in America is really well known, even legendary. I mean, when I was growing up in Canada, even we watched the American Thanksgiving specials because most of the TV shows we watched were bleeding over the border from the United States. And so when I moved here, I already understood the cultural importance of your biggest holiday. So that's the American version of Thanksgiving, and I still maintain that it's a much bigger deal here than it ever was in Canada. I mean, don't get me wrong, Canadians also celebrate Thanksgiving, but they do it more than a month before we do, because way up there above the 49th parallel, the harvest comes a lot earlier than it does down here. So they celebrate Thanksgiving in October. And while the holiday is important to Canadians, it's nowhere near as important as it is down here. In the United States, Thanksgiving almost seems bigger than Christmas, but not so much where I was born. I mean, they still have turkey and cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie and special sermons in church about being thankful and even a little bit of football. But in Canada, I could safely schedule other events across Thanksgiving and not create a problem. In fact, I used to host a major fundraising event on Thanksgiving, and it didn't kill attendance. Gene and I even got married on Thanksgiving, and everybody still turned out. As most of you know, that would not happen in America. The first official Thanksgiving in Canada was in 1879, nearly 250 years after the Pilgrims celebrated theirs. But of course, the practice of Thanksgiving, or at least the tradition of harvest festivals, goes back a lot further than that. So, in some regards, I'll admit my brother was at least partly right. History records a Thanksgiving festival in Canada back in 1579, more than 40 years before the famous dinner at Plymouth. It happened when Martin Frobisher, the English explorer, was looking for the fabled Northwest Passage, a route that could take you over the top of North America. He was up around Baffin Island, a place that I love to visit, and he intended to start a small community up there. He had 15 ships loaded with supplies, but then the weather and the ice demolished one of those boats, which meant that he lost a lot of his building material. It was really discouraging, and it meant there was going to be a lot of hardship. But then a minister by the name of Maester Wolfall preached a sermon about gratitude when they suddenly experienced just a little bit of good luck. According to one historical record, he made unto them a godly sermon, exhorting them especially to be thankful to God for their strange and miraculous deliverance in those so dangerous places, and putting them in mind of the uncertainty of man's life, willed them to make themselves always ready as resolute men to enjoy and accept thankfully whatsoever adventure his divine providence should appoint. So that was 1579, and a few years later in 1604, there was another Thanksgiving feast when the explorer Samuel Champlain and his men founded something known as the Order of Good Cheer, an organization which held feasts of gratitude with the local Indian tribes, the same way the Pilgrims did. But they did it 15 years earlier. So publicly, I guess I have to concede the debate. It appears that there were Thanksgiving celebrations in Canada before we were doing it down here. But then again, neither country really invented the idea because, well, harvest festivals have been around for a really, really long time, going back to very ancient cultures. What we often forget here in the overfed West is just how hard life has been for most people for most of our history. When you and I talk about food shortages, we usually mean that we can't get our hands on some of our favorite things, unlike some places on this planet where people just hope to find something to eat. It would seem that one of the things that tends to evaporate when times are easy is a sense of gratitude. Here in the West, the more we have, the more we appear to feel entitled to have it. Today, after the dramatic secularization of Western society, there are still millions of people who continue to pray before they eat. It's a gesture of gratitude. But for many well-meaning North Americans, I think that prayer has become something of a superstition, something they do from a sense of obligation more than an actual sense of gratitude. I mean, I remember as a little kid wondering what might happen if I didn't pray before I ate, as if saying grace was some kind of magical incantation that removed dangerous impurities from the food. And I know I'm not alone with that. I've witnessed a lot of people who suddenly stop eating halfway through their first bite of food, trying to remember, did I say grace? And some of them get this mild look of panic, as if something really bad is going to happen if they get the ritual wrong. That mild sense of fear is a legacy that we kind of inherited from our medieval past, where a lot of Christian preachers gave the impression that God was looking for some excuse, any excuse at all, to strike us dead with a thunderbolt if we stepped a little bit out of line, as if he was the Roman god Jupiter. Because of that, a lot of the religious rituals back then were intended to just stave off the wrath of God, and a prayer before dinner wasn't really a matter of faith. It was just one more thing you added to your list of religious good deeds in order to keep yourself out of the fires of hell. Of course, I'm not questioning the practice of saying grace, because gratitude is a good thing, and Christians have noted that Jesus set the example. In Luke 22, at the Last Supper, you'll notice that Jesus took bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Bible's advice that you and I cultivate an attitude of thankfulness. And in a world where people seem to feel more and more entitled, and where things like civility and gratitude seem to be fading into the background, maybe this is something we could afford to revisit, especially during Thanksgiving. I'll be right back after this.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. Bible prophecy can be incredibly vivid and confusing. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Our free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and our world. Study online or request them by mail and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
I think one of the reasons we often don't feel very thankful is ironically because we have so much to be thankful for. I mean, don't get me wrong, life on planet Earth is just as frustrating as it used to be, at least from an emotional perspective. But a lot of our material needs are being met in a way that would have surprised the socks off our ancestors. Even the poor among us are much better off than the poor of the past. And overall, our level of material prosperity easily outstrips almost every generation that came before us. In fact, many of us live far more conveniently than medieval nobles did. But somehow, at the same time, we seem to be less thankful than they were, and I sometimes wonder if a little bit of hardship might not be a good thing. And judging by the state of the world right now, I have a sneaking suspicion there's a bit of hardship coming down the pike. I was born at a very privileged time in history, certainly more privileged than even my own parents. I don't have to deal with Nazi occupation or state-orchestrated famines. I didn't even have to deal with things like polio or iron lungs because a lot of those kinds of problems had been mostly eliminated by the time I drew my first breath. I didn't have to go and fight a war. I didn't have to go and beg on a street corner hoping for just enough change to get something to eat. I mean, it doesn't mean that my life was easy because it really wasn't, but it was certainly easier for me than the people who came before me. And yet my generation, the ones coming after me as well, somehow we seem a lot less thankful and we assume that we deserve what we have, maybe more. So maybe today, in light of the Thanksgiving holiday, I'd like to share some reminders from the Scriptures that Christian believers should always be cultivating gratitude. And I think I want to start with a passage from the book of Philippians, which was written by the Apostle Paul, a man whose life was anything but easy. He writes in Philippians chapter 4, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Now, there's a lot of information packed into that short verse, so let's see if we can just unpack it a little bit. First of all, I want you to notice that he writes this in the context of people having serious problems. The Philippians were anxious, which is a phenomenon that is certainly widespread again today. In fact, something like 40 million adults in this country find themselves struggling with an anxiety disorder during any given year. We might be the most prosperous generation in the history of the world, but it's starting to look like we might also be one of the most anxious. And while some people are dealing with a genuine mental illness or a devastating condition like PTSD, which might require some professional help, for the rest of us, Paul is offering a remedy for anxiety. He says, "Be anxious for nothing," which implies that you have a choice. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, simply choosing not to be anxious, well, that hasn't really worked very well. I'm one of those people who lies awake in the middle of the night almost every single night, worried about problems that I can't fix at 2 o'clock in the morning. And rationally, I know that I'm wasting my time in the wee hours, but emotionally, it's really hard to turn off the feedback loop that keeps the problem alive in my middle-of-the-night imagination. And I do all the usual things that people recommend. I get out of bed and make a list of things I plan to do in the morning, which convinces your brain that the problem has been taken care of for now. I remind myself as I lay there in the dark that most of the things we worry about never actually happen. I take a few deep breaths. I listen to the radio to distract myself. And all of those exercises certainly help, but it's not enough. So Paul adds another very important component to the power of choice, and that's the practice of gratitude. Be anxious for nothing, he says. And you'll notice he doesn't say, try not to be anxious. He just tells you not to do it, which is a command. And at first glance, that's a tall order. I mean, how in the world do you just shut off your obsessive thinking? Well, Paul suggests that we do it by bringing those thoughts to God with prayer and supplication. In other words, take the problem and give it to somebody far more capable than you. And really that makes a lot of sense, because when we were kids and our parents promised to solve a problem for us, we usually breathed a big sigh of relief because somebody bigger than us was on the case and we could just let go of the thing. But for some reason, after childhood, we tend to doubt God's ability to handle things, even if we say we believe in Him. And I know some people laugh at faith in God as if it's a crutch for simpletons, but that tells me they've never actually tried it. There's nothing easy about a relationship with God. But if you can learn to do it, surrendering makes all the difference in the world. Let me diverge from the book of Philippians for just a moment, and I want to show you something in the book of Psalms that I was reading just, a few weeks ago. And if you're following along in your own Bible, you might want to bookmark Philippians 4 because we're going to come back there. But for now, let's take a look at Psalm 131. It says, "Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty. Neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor with things too profound for me." Take a moment and ask yourself, what do I really know? How much of this universe am I in charge of? Some of the wisest philosophers in the history of the world came to the conclusion that they really didn't know much at all. I mean, apart from a few accomplished physicists, how many of us really understand how gravity works? Most of us just trust it. We use gravity to get things done. How many of us can grasp how tiny little particles seem to communicate across vast distances faster than the speed of light through quantum entanglement? If you don't understand that, are you going to stop living your life? Do you really understand how ball lightning works? Do you know what dark matter is, or what the universe is actually made out of? There are lots of things that you and I struggle to understand, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And just because the Bible has inexplicable concepts, that doesn't mean this book isn't true. In fact, if this book was inspired by an omniscient, infinite God, you'd have to expect that you don't understand it all. But that's another show for another day, and we've got to get back to Psalm 131. David simply tells us that he doesn't waste a lot of time worried about the things he doesn't understand. He just accepts them because he's come to know that God is real, which brings us to his second verse, where he says, "Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with his mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me." One of the most frequent metaphors found in the Bible is the image of parenthood. Over and over, the Bible describes God as our Father and you as His child. And here in the Psalms, David tells us what kind of children we are. He says, we're weaned, which means that from heaven's perspective, you and I have barely moved beyond the stage of complete and utter helplessness. We're like toddlers, maybe even younger. The only real skill from a cosmic perspective that we've developed is the ability to eat a little bit of solid food. Now, you and I like to think that in the cosmic scheme of things, the human race has reached some kind of developmental pinnacle. We think you and I are the executive chefs and master painters of the universe, but according to the Bible, we're still busy making mud pies and meaningless scribbles with crayons. And judging by the mess we've made of this planet, there's a really good chance that the human race is probably still at the stage of soiling its diapers. Of course, it's not that we're completely helpless, because we're not. I mean, the human race is incredibly inventive, incredibly resourceful, at times incredibly inspiring, but I don't think there are too many people who would say that somehow the human race has arrived. According to the Bible, our place in this universe is that of a recently weaned infant. And if you think about really small children, you'll notice something fascinating. Sometimes they're far too confident because they don't understand their own limitations. Oh, they like to play grown-up. They like to try and convince us that they're ready for life. But then at other times, they're far too frightened, hiding behind their mother's skirt, and we have to convince the little ones to exercise a little more courage. And that's who we are, according to the Bible. So when David faced anxiety, he reminded himself, we're not alone in this universe, and there are things we absolutely will not understand. But at the same time, we're children who have a Father, and we can leave the biggest problems with Him. David says that's how he calmed and quieted his soul. I'll be right back after this.
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon.
Just before the break, we were looking at Psalm 131, where David reminds us that we're barely weaned children when it comes to our place in the universe. But he also suggests we have a Father who knows we can't always fend for ourselves, and he says we can learn to trust him. We can let go of those obsessive thoughts that plague us, and we can find comfort in knowing that somebody else is going to deal with the things we can't control. Now, of course, it's easier to say that than to do it. But I've got to tell you, even though I haven't mastered this by a long shot, as the years go by, it's definitely getting better. David concludes by saying, "O Israel, hope in the Lord, from this time forth and forever." Now, before the clock runs out on me yet again, let's go back to that passage in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, where Paul is giving us some advice for dealing with anxiety. "Be anxious for nothing," he writes, "but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Sometimes you'll hear Christians refer to something they call the peace that passes understanding, and this is what they're talking about. It's the peace of mind you get when you realize you're a cosmic toddler with a heavenly Father, a personal God, a God who's very interested in what happens to you. And the secret, according to Paul, is not only leaving your problems with God, but leaving them behind with an attitude of thanksgiving. In other words, be grateful for what you have. That's the reason that Thanksgiving is really my favorite holiday. I mean, yeah, I enjoy the nice meal that Jean makes. She's a much better cook than me. And yeah, I've been known to crash on the couch and watch a little football when my tummy is full, but it's the original concept behind the holiday that really makes me treasure it. I mean, other holidays like Christmas, they come with a lot of stress and a lot of activity and a lot of obligation. But there's something pure about Thanksgiving. It gives us an opportunity to stop and be grateful, which is huge when it comes to finding real peace of mind. You know, back when the Pilgrims celebrated that first Thanksgiving in 1621, they had a lot to be thankful for. A lot of their friends and family had died from the brutal hardship of living in Plymouth, especially in the winter. But now they suddenly had this abundance of food. In the Old World, they were forced to leave England and relocate to the Netherlands because the state church had outlawed a lot of their beliefs. And now as they gathered around a table with friends, they were celebrating one of the most precious gifts a person could hope for, religious freedom. You know, there's a big part of me that suspects that our generation probably complains a lot more than our ancestors did, even though we have less to complain about. Some of my relatives endured incredible hardship when the Nazis seized their towns and put them in labor camps. Do you know something? Growing up, I never heard one of them complain about it. They had to work harder than we do. They had far fewer prospects of an easy life, and they lived life with a smile and a heart full of gratitude. And it occurs to me that the less we actually have, the more likely we seem to be grateful. I'm reminded of that scene from Pilgrim's Progress where the lead character named Christian approaches the cross, and the huge burden he was carrying on his back suddenly falls to the ground. Bunyan writes, "Up this way, therefore, did burdened Christian run, but not without great difficulty, because of the load on his back. He ran thus till he came to a place somewhat ascending, and upon that place stood a cross, and a little below in the bottom a tomb. So I saw in my dream that just as Christian came up with the cross, his burden loosed from off his shoulders, and fell from off his back, and began to tumble, and so continued to do till it came to the mouth of the tomb, where it fell in, and I saw it no more. Then was Christian glad and lightsome, and said with a merry heart, He hath given me rest by his sorrow, and life by his death." When Bunyan's protagonist approached that cross, the heavy bundle he was carrying on his back suddenly fell off, and Bunyan said at that point he was glad and lightsome. And you know, over the years, I've kind of noticed something really important. Sometimes people who grow up in the church kind of take what they have for granted. And when someone from outside the church suddenly finds the church, well, the lifetimers are amazed at his or her excitement. And maybe it has something to do with the size of their burdens. Sometimes people outside the church are a lot more honest about their imperfections and their guilt. They feel the burden of living in a broken world far more keenly. And when they finally find relief, they feel that relief a lot more keenly than the rest of us. I'll be right back after this.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like, Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
The Thanksgiving holiday gives us an incredible opportunity. Right now, I know that some of you are still carrying a load on your back and you've been weighed down by worry, regret, guilt, and it's been robbing you of the peace of mind that Paul promises. The good news is that you can drop your burden now. You can remind yourself you're a cosmic toddler and you have a Father in heaven who's willing to handle it. You're not alone. This is an opportunity to practice real gratitude and quit living with brutal anxiety. Maybe take a moment to express out loud what you're grateful for. Just sit there for a moment and make a list, and then read that list and choose to be thankful. I think you might start to get a sense of what those pilgrims felt in 1621. And once you've done this once, rehearse what you're thankful for, I'm guessing you're going to want to do it a whole lot more often. I'm Shawn Boonstra. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us this week, and happy Thanksgiving.